All right, let's get started. Looks like everybody's settled. Welcome to New America. I am Michael Calabrese. I direct the Wireless Future project here at the Open Technology Institute, one of New America's issue-based programs. And today we're here to talk about, it's actually turns out to be a timely event, speaking about Wi-Fi and unlicensed LTE, since we just had the collaborative industry coexistence test plan finalized last week, and then some recent announcements by the FCC as well. And as I'm sure many of you know, and why you are here, there's been a debate of sorts raging over the past year and a half since consumer advocates, some companies that rely on Wi-Fi, some cities and others have argued that Wi-Fi, as we know it, the Wi-Fi ecosystem may be at risk due to a plan by cellular carriers to begin using the same unlicensed frequencies, particularly at 5 gigahertz, to augment the exclusively licensed spectrum they currently use. So the two worlds have been running on a complementary basis in parallel but completely separate as far as frequencies of the airwaves, now potentially coming together. And again, whether it's coexistence or crash, that's the question. So the FCC has delayed approving carrier LTE over unlicensed, LTE-U, pending the development of a multi-stakeholder coexistence testing plan. And as I mentioned, that plan is now finalized. Kevin Robinson, who will be coming up ahead of the discussion panel, will summarize it on behalf of the Wi-Fi Alliance, which organized the process. First up, though, will be Josh Breitbart from Mayor de Blasio's office in New York City to talk about New York City's incredibly ambitious, fast and free citywide Wi-Fi initiative. First, though, I just wanted to, the Open Technology Institute has not been neutral in this exactly. We filed comments that we did with Harold Feld and Public Knowledge over a year ago when the commission invited comment, and we filed on behalf of the Public Interest Spectrum Coalition, which is a whole number of nonprofit consumer media reform, civil rights, education, library groups. And I think one of the things we emphasize that you'll probably hear again here is that consumer advocates are by no means opposed to new unlicensed technologies. We generally celebrate them, including unlicensed, including LTE on unlicensed bands. But we also recognize that LTE-U is radically different from other unlicensed technologies. So our comments laid out a series of reinforcing concerns with unlicensed LTE. First, and I think probably most important, is that the incentives are not the same. So LTE-U is not premised on the use and control. Well, LTE-U is premised on the use of control of unlicensed spectrum as ancillary to a license-anchored network. In fact, LTE-U will be one-way download only as an augmentation, which means that, in effect, the control of scarce and costly licensed carrier spectrum is a de facto prerequisite for harnessing unlicensed spectrum as supplementary downlink. In comparison, coexistence and fair sharing mechanisms have been built into Wi-Fi's DNA from the very beginning as a kind of necessity. So features such as listen before talk an exponential back-off, impose overhead on Wi-Fi. That's why you often hear, oh, Wi-Fi isn't, on a bit basis, quite as efficient. But that's more than offset by the fact that many different users can share the same channels in a relatively small area and without the need for centralized control or coordination. Hence, you get enormous spectrum reuse, which is a different type of efficiency. This best efforts connectivity without permission is the central ingredient in Wi-Fi's success in provisioning more connectivity at lower costs and higher speeds on less spectrum. And I think most people are becoming familiar with the idea now that whereas 6 years ago we were talking about a spectrum crunch or spectrum crisis, that never happened. And it never happened primarily because Wi-Fi is now carrying roughly 80% of mobile device data traffic overall. So you're paying your carrier on your smartphone, you're paying your carrier for mobility, walking down the street, driving in the car, but most applications, most data use is nomadic. It's somewhere near Wi-Fi, and that's what your device automatically flips to. More than 75% of households have Wi-Fi, which means 2 and 3 and 4 and more people can share the same wired connection, giving you mobility around the home, around the office. There's billions of devices with Wi-Fi, far more than with cellular connectivity. More than 90% of tablets don't have cellular connectivity at all. So for that reason, it's just was a concern to us in the Public Interest Spectrum Coalition that unlike Wi-Fi, the LTE-U control channel is insulated from interference since it operates on a different license band. A second concern we raised is that LTE-U is designed so that the coexistence features are configurable at the discretion of individual carriers. So they can decide the duty cycle for themselves, for example. And so in that case, sometimes when equipment the FCC looks at it, and in theory it can coexist, an individual carrier might decide, well, maybe we don't want to coexist right now in this place. So that may be a topic to talk a bit more about. A third concern we had is that carriers will have both the technical ability and strong incentives to use LTE-U to engage in anti-competitive behavior. So you've probably seen many reports of the emergence right now of Wi-Fi first competition. For example, Google has Project Fi that's primarily Wi-Fi, millions of hotspots, seamless authentication, but using T-Mobile and Sprint as backup for mobility. Comcast, and David Don's here for Comcast today, has between 10 and 20 million hotspots that are generated off of their wireline customers, and many believe will enter the mobile marketplace on that basis. So carriers will have the option to adjust LTE-U access points to introduce just enough latency or jitter or packet loss to frustrate consumer use of Wi-Fi for real-time apps, such as FaceTime video calling or VoIP. This could ensure that Wi-Fi cannot get the traction as a close substitute for mobile carrier offerings. So that's been a concern as well. A fourth concern we raised is that consumers for the first time may need to pay carriers for Wi-Fi offload, or not technically Wi-Fi offload, but to offload traffic onto over unlicensed spectrum, which is now done typically onto a network that's being paid for anyway, a wireline network, your home network, your work, Starbucks, wherever you are, the city of New York. So today, carrier and consumer interests are aligned. There have been studies showing that Wi-Fi offload saves carriers tens of billions of dollars per year in infrastructure they don't have to build in relation to the total amount of traffic. And as a result, most smartphones today default to Wi-Fi. but we raised the concern that LTE-U creates a carrier incentive to switch default settings on devices so that users pay for offload they previously consumed over Wi-Fi at no marginal cost. PISC, just kind of in conclusion, our coalition urged the FCC to observe the regulatory version of the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm to the commons. When the FCC designated a public spectrum commons at 2.4 gigahertz over 2 decades ago, it set in motion a virtuous cycle that has proven critical to today's increasingly mobile internet access. It's more ubiquitous, faster, and certainly a lot more affordable for the amount of traffic we all generate because of that short distance over unlicensed Wi-Fi into a wireline connection. And thanks to Chairman Wheeler, the FCC has adopted a cautious and collaborative approach. The FCC initially declined to certify LTE-U devices until cellular and Wi-Fi companies worked together to develop a coexistence testing process. For 15 years, the FCC hasn't had to worry about a tragedy of the spectrum commons because licensed and unlicensed networks have operated on entirely different bands, and the interests of unlicensed companies have aligned enough that the engineers in a series of IEEE 802.11 working groups could agree to share fairly. Keeping that in mind, we'll hear more today about how we move forward from here, from this initial step, this first step of a coexistence testing plan, and how the FCC can sustain the enormous social and economic welfare of the public spectrum commons. So with that, I will turn it over to Josh Breitbart. This is in part of, well, let me tell you first that Josh is the senior advisor for broadband in the office of Mayor Bill de Blasio, New York City, which drastically understates his role as kind of the guy who's pulling together this incredibly ambitious plan to make New York City the world's great Wi-Fi city and the most connected city on Earth. And it's a coming home of sorts for Josh because he started doing this work, including even in New York City, while he was here at New America, where he was director of field operations for the Open Technology Institute. And he established a very action-oriented team within this think tank, which was itself very unusual and I think helped to encourage this rethinking of the think tank that our president, Anne Marie Slaughter, is still working on. And he implemented broadband adoption programs and built wireless networks in partnership with community-based organizations in cities not only around the country like Philadelphia, Detroit, in Brooklyn and New York, but around the world with sending his folks to Africa and other places. Josh's experience with municipal Wi-Fi dates to 2007 when he authored the definitive case study of Wireless Philadelphia that was published by me, by the Wireless Future Project, and had a big impact in sort of setting people straight about what went right or wrong with that initial effort at municipal Wi-Fi. And now he has a chance to do it the right way, some years later. So turn it over to Josh to brief you on New York's effort.
Well, thank you, Michael, for that very kind introduction and for giving me my start with New America, publishing that report. The Wi-Fi environment with cities was pretty different in 2005, 2007 in terms of what the environment looked like for cities, how they thought they could use Wi-Fi than it is today. I don't think that any of you know this, but Walt Whitman, somebody New Yorkers are very proud of, when he said, "I am large and I contain multitudes," he was actually talking about Wi-Fi in New York City. So what we're doing now, so Wi-Fi is really critical to our efforts to connect everybody in New York, to provide a platform for digital innovation, but in particular also to assist the fifth of the city, as much as 35% that don't have connections at home, 35% of low-income New Yorkers who don't have connections at home, and many of them rely on mobile plans, and many of those folks face data charges that really leave them with marginal access. So Wi-Fi is a key, really an essential ingredient to everything that we're doing to serve all residents, to serve 54 million visitors to the city, to serve our businesses, and as well as the city's needs. So I just want to, and I think by talking about some of these initiatives, can help clarify what the stakes are in this discussion over LTE and unlicensed bands, and why the city considers itself such a major stakeholder, not only on behalf of 8.5 million New York residents, but in partnership with other cities that are also undertaking their own plans, and from Wi-Fi is essential. So, so these are two of our top-level goals for Wi-Fi in New York City. This idea of promoting a seamless user experience across public networks, and doing that leveraging the existing public and commercial wireless networks and corridors, including the backbone created by Link NYC, which I'll talk about in some detail. In this effort to take what Wi-Fi has enabled in terms of innovation and a thousand flowers blooming, and turn that into a coherent garden, is no simple task, especially across a city as vast and complex as New York. And so we certainly are concerned when there are policy and technological developments that might add complexity. So I'm just going to talk about the way we use Wi-Fi in these different areas: schools, libraries, public spaces, as well as networks for neighborhoods and public housing. As Michael mentioned, you'll also see some resonance of the work that we did here at the Open Technology Institute. Schools, we have a great team that manages IT at the schools. They manage about 75,000 access points across over 1,300 buildings to serve about 1.1 million school students every day. So our school system is one of the 10 largest cities in the country, and it's fully covered with Wi-Fi. These are examples of some of the coverage maps of the schools, and what you can see there is that the access points are placed in the classrooms to ensure that those places have high-speed coverage for essential utility. But to get the full coverage throughout the building, they rely on weaker signals. And as we're trying to even expand that to include coverage of the campus area of the school and integrate a lot of other types of programs into the school, anything that would impede coverage, including at those lower levels, would really impede that effort to deliver education to those million-plus school kids. And in doing this, they're supporting about 500,000 DOE, Department of Education devices, and the mayor also initiated a policy to allow schools to support student devices as well. So that's about another million or so devices that they are looking to support. So again, when we see a technology that might add complexity to this environment, we are incredibly concerned and seek to intervene to make sure that anything that's put into the unlicensed bands preserves our ability to teach students. Likewise, our libraries, not only do we serve Wi-Fi in all 203 branches across our 3 library systems, but our libraries also are increasingly looking to put Wi-Fi in the exterior of the buildings, as the Brooklyn Public Library has done here in Brownsville. And again, you can see, looking at those heat maps, that coverage in the area is really dependent on the full capacity of Wi-Fi. And as well, we also have a program where the libraries have distributed 10,000 mobile hotspots, loan those out throughout the city. And it's been a great solution, a huge help to households throughout the city. And that's an environment where, we're asking people to take these home and set them up in their house and use that for homework or other needs. And again, if it's not working for them at home and they don't know why, it really impedes our ability to do programs like that. So this is Link NYC. This is, to take nothing away from the schools and the libraries, but I would say the most ambitious Wi-Fi project in the world right now. It's fiber connected, high-speed Wi-Fi, up to gigabit speeds. We're rolling it out throughout the entire city and replacing our payphone infrastructure. And it's required to have a coverage area of 150 feet. But what you can see there is that the coverage area actually does extend much further with lower signals. And what that enables is a corridor effect. You can see it a little bit better in this coverage map. You can see how you get that corridor effect and coverage in the side streets. And using Hotspot 2.0 and other new technologies, these corridors become platforms for Wi-Fi calling or other types of services that really require continuous coverage. And this is an effort that a private consortium is investing an estimated $200 million, and it's generating $500 million for the city. So obviously there are a lot of things that we like about it in addition to delivering this incredible high-speed coverage in commercial corridors throughout the city. There are other commercial corridors that we work with business improvement districts to cover. This is the Flatiron District, which is an area with a lot of startups. You can see how coverage gets into Madison Square Park, and I included a picture of our Shake Shack in Madison Square Park, where a lot of people sit outside, and the ability for that 23rd Street corridor to serve into that park is an incredible amenity for those folks and for the neighborhood. And again, relies on Wi-Fi's full current capabilities. This is an extension of that program to now serve plazas and public spaces in outer boroughs and other parts of the city that have become these hubs for communities as public spaces. You can see a street fair and art exhibits and ways that the community uses Corona Plaza here in Queens. And what you can also see from this heat map is that covering these public spaces is actually pretty complicated. They're not huge, but you have to be able to serve them from one of the nearby buildings, and to do so really relies on weaker signal strength to get into that area. And again, Wi-Fi becomes a vital part of the use of this public space and these public spaces throughout the city. Now, this project is one of the projects that when I was here at New America, we collaborated with a community organization to start this project, Red Hook Wi-Fi. And it's an incredible effort and really points to the types of openness and innovation from Wi-Fi, because community here, which once upon a time actually was, well, I shouldn't say what they were doing with FM radio signals, but they had access to unlicensed spectrum and could start a community wireless network, and they used their ability to organize their neighbors, to give them access to certain buildings. And that network was actually in its nascent stages up and running when Sandy hit this neighborhood. This neighborhood of Red Hook used to be a marsh before it was cemented over and turned into a port for the city. And it was completely inundated during Sandy. But because of where some of this was positioned, the Wi-Fi network stayed up and running. Not only that, but right afterwards, they were able to extend the signal to cover some key areas like the park that's in the center, which was the place for aid distribution. And that ability to entirely bootstrap that effort was really only possible because of Wi-Fi and what that enabled. And when I say bootstrap, this was a totally community-built effort. They've worked with residents, young residents of the public houses there in Red Hook. This is actually Rob and Kathy. I saw them last night at a fundraiser for Red Hook Initiative. Rob is now an intern at Google after having been exposed to technology building this network in his neighborhood. And Kathy is actually an employee of New America in the Resilient Communities Program, working to extend this effort to other parts of the city. This is the future. We're now, the city is working closely with Red Hook Initiative to extend this to serve the businesses in the area and the residents of the Red Hook houses. And again, there's going to be, with this plan, seamless connectivity from within the residential space throughout the neighborhood to the community centers and businesses and commercial corridors, which will make this, in our estimation, the most connected neighborhood in the country. We're very excited about this effort and the community's leadership on it. We're taking this model also to other public houses. This is Queensbridge, which is the largest public housing development in North America, about 7,000 residents. You can see Ms. Simpson is the president of the Tenant Association. And again, residents are participating in the construction of this network and organizing their neighbors to take part and join in using what will be a pervasive Wi-Fi network covering what is essentially 6 city blocks that is the Queensbridge development. And this is the first of a number of developments that the mayor is committed to covering. The other component of the Red Hook Wi-Fi network, this ability to provide continuous communications during and after a natural disaster, has also inspired the city to replicate this model in 6 other neighborhoods where actually New America's Resilient Communities Program, where Kathy works, is partnering with a different community organization in each neighborhood to build out these networks to serve small businesses. And again, they can do this efficiently with community ownership that's only possible with unlicensed spectrum made possible by Wi-Fi and its open standards. And again, this is, you see residents of those communities already participating in the planning and construction of those networks. So this gives you some sense of not only the breadth of Wi-Fi's capabilities and the complexity of what we're doing as a city to connect all residents and businesses, and the challenge of weaving that together into a coherent fabric. But it also really shows you why Wi-Fi itself is so important. The principles that, the engineering principles that Michael was talking about, listen before talk, exponential backoff, these are really principles of free speech. And when we are here to defend Wi-Fi and the availability of unlicensed spectrum, it really is about the ability for the general public and governments to participate in speech in the arena of wireless spectrum. And I think that there's a concern that any technology that would operate in those bands and not follow those principles, use the band primarily for download traffic to have people listen, could in some ways be a wireless equivalent of a Citizens United, crowding out the ability for the general public to make use of unlicensed spectrum to form community connections, to engage with their local government, and have networks that are meaningful and vital for everything that we do as a city in New York. So that is why we had written to the standard-setting bodies and are watching this proceeding with great interest, and are very appreciative of the chance to be here today to participate in this discussion, to hear from the Wi-Fi Alliance and some of the key stakeholders in this process, and we look forward to seeing how this is implemented, and we'll be watching closely, and I'm sure that we'll be speaking with all the stakeholders as we go forward, as well as with the FCC. So thank you again, Michael, for the chance to be here, and for all of the panelists and presenters today.
Thanks, Josh. That's really, I think very few people unfortunately know the scope and all those different pieces and how they'll be coming together over the next several years in New York City. Josh and our next speaker are not on the panel, but will be available when we go to question and answer toward the end, which I just wanted to assure you, you all have a chance for comments and questions, I hope. I hope a chance, if it isn't everybody, during the final portion. So one more speaker before the discussion panel is Kevin Robinson, Vice President of Marketing for the Wi-Fi Alliance, which is, when you see that Wi-Fi logo, that's them. They decide who gets it, who doesn't. Kevin oversees lots of things, including the Wi-Fi Alliance program management that includes its certification program. Although it's not on his bio, I think this past year, Kevin has also learned to be an effective diplomat because he's had to engage in shuttle diplomacy among all the different chip makers, equipment vendors, carriers, internet companies, and others who had a stake in this often contentious coexistence testing plan development. So he's going to bring us up to speed on how that worked and where it landed. Kevin?
Well, thank you, Michael, very much for having us here. This is somewhat of a new experience for us. I think Wi-Fi Alliance is relatively new to much of the policy discussion around unlicensed. Most of our time we've been very much focused on delivering technologies that really bring incredible benefit to people around the world. But I am glad that now we are part of this discussion because I think it's really important to realize just how important unlicensed spectrum and policy around unlicensed spectrum is going to be to people's lives going forward. So this is what I'm going to be covering, and I'm just going to very briefly provide some of the background info on Wi-Fi Alliance, as well as really what has made Wi-Fi such an important success story, before getting into some of the specifics of what we delivered through this coexistence development effort. So I'm not going to ask for anybody to raise their hands as to whether you've actually heard of Wi-Fi Alliance or not, and you wouldn't hurt my feelings. The reality is most people have never heard of us as an organization, but I can bet that virtually everybody everybody in this room, and in fact most people around the world, have in some way been impacted by the work that happens within Wi-Fi Alliance. Wi-Fi Alliance is the worldwide network of companies that brings you Wi-Fi. For more than 16 years, we have been working to build the ecosystem, to bring companies together. More than 700 companies right now are part of Wi-Fi Alliance, spanning everything, all areas of the value chain, from chipset manufacturers, device manufacturers, down all the way to service providers. So really anybody who touches Wi-Fi is very likely a member of the organization. And those companies really come together under the banner of Wi-Fi Alliance to deliver the best possible experience for the end user. And one of the most important things we do to kind of further that goal is we administer the Wi-Fi certified certification program, which again ensures that users can get the best possible experience, that when they go out and buy the latest and greatest smartphone and they take it home, it is going to simply work with the router. If they go into a public hotspot space, whether it's operated by a fixed operator or a mobile operator, it's simply going to work. And so when you think of kind of that shared purpose of seamless connectivity, and it just works. You can understand why we have taken a role in ensuring that the experience going forward with Wi-Fi is maintained, that users who depend on it today can continue to depend on it going forward. We're also in that 16 years have done a pretty good job of serving as a collaboration forum for these diverse set of companies. So when you look at our decades-long experience developing testing, as well as our ability to work as this collaborative, inclusive forum, really I think that Wi-Fi Alliance was uniquely suited to help serve as the forum for the coexistence effort that we've just concluded. So in large part due to that, the initiative or the efforts of our members, Wi-Fi really has become one of the world's greatest success stories. There are nearly 8 billion Wi-Fi devices still in use, actively in use today. So again, think about that. So there is a Wi-Fi device being used today for every man, woman, and child on the planet. And of course, that number continues to grow. Roughly 3 billion Wi-Fi devices are shipped every single year. So again, very, very, very important and very highly regarded technology. And to take a step further, I think it's important to understand just how critical Wi-Fi is to world commerce and, again, to people's lives. If you look at every single packet of data that traverses the internet, more than half of it is going over a Wi-Fi connection. That has incredible economic value. And again, it's absolutely core to people's lives. I think some of the scenarios that Josh brought up earlier are just further illustrative of that. And of course, we continue to move into many new markets. Wi-Fi, it's more than just Wi-Fi. It's broadband, it's access, it's connectivity and access to the world economy. And 5 gigahertz, where really this discussion around coexistence and many of the concerns around coexistence started, is essential to Wi-Fi's continued success. Wi-Fi certified AC, which is today's version of Wi-Fi, has really driven a very impressive shift to 5 gigahertz. With most devices shipping this year operating in both the 2.4 gigahertz band as well as the 5 gigahertz band. And within the next 5 years, nearly 100% of devices will be operating in this spectrum. So again, it's very important that we, that as a country and as communities around the world are looking at policy that can foster innovation and continued connectivity in this important spectrum. So when you look at Wi-Fi's role in the world, it's not surprising that when we started to have concerns and people started identifying potential instances of new technologies having an adverse effect on Wi-Fi, that the reaction was it was a strong reaction, and it was a very, very passionate reaction. Sometimes we do these polls and frequently find that many people will rank Wi-Fi access up there with their morning coffee. I'm a pretty heavy coffee drinker, and I can tell you that I'm probably in that camp. That is just something that is part of every day. So again, it's understandable that people took such pay such strong attention to the developments for coexistence with Wi-Fi. But given that passion, there was the risk that we could spend a lot of time arguing with each other, but at the end of the day, not really deliver on what needs to be done to ensure continued access to Wi-Fi, but also continued innovation in unlicensed spectrum. And I think the one single point that I could point to in much of this debate and in this initiative was when all the various stakeholders were able to come together and agreed to a very important first principle. And that is simply that everyone involved acknowledged that maintaining Wi-Fi was absolutely critical to the billions of people who rely on it every day. And it may not sound like much, but this one single principle really led to, it kind of was a stepping stone and bootstrapped further agreement, and ultimately led to the successful delivery of a coexistence test plan. So for example, there were some additional shared principles that really drove the coexistence effort. One was an agreement that testing of LTE-U devices was the best way to reach this goal of maintaining the Wi-Fi experience. And two, agreement on where that work was going to take place. And so the various stakeholders, I believe it was back in November, agreed to collaborate on development of testing within Wi-Fi Alliance. The group then came together and came up with an agreed definition of fairness. And this definition of fairness here, which essentially says that if you introduce an LTE-U network into an environment where Wi-Fi already exists, that you will have no worse impact on that network than introducing a second Wi-Fi network. And that definition of fairness served as our compass. It's what we used for really many of the technical and detailed decisions that had to happen around coexistence testing. And so following that compass, dozens of companies from the LTE-U community, from the Wi-Fi community, all came together to make very constructive contributions and really delivered a test plan on an incredibly aggressive timeline. I know I've said this in other venues that the coexistence testing effort took roughly, we accomplished it in roughly half the time of one of our typical certification programs. And so what does that test program look like? Well, I'm pleased to announce that last week we did release the Wi-Fi Alliance LTE-U coexistence test plan, and it marked the successful culmination of months of effort from a large number of companies. Now, of course, compromises were made by every side. I'm sure we're going to hear a little bit about that during the panel, so I'm not going to steal their thunder. But the reason I bring that up is not to relitigate some of the compromises that had to happen, but to point out that this is just the nature of the beast when you're doing something like this. Not everybody gets everything they want. And Wi-Fi Alliance has a strong track record of operating in that type of an environment. But regardless, the companies involved remained engaged all the way until the end. And in fact, even as late as the final workshop that was less than 24 hours before publication of the test plan, we had companies from the LTE-U side and the Wi-Fi side looking for creative ways to incorporate one more contribution that might get additional parties on board. And it was that engagement and that commitment to the very end that really allowed us to accomplish this goal. So where we landed is we now have a final test plan that really does represent the best possible outcome that industry could have reached given the situation we are in. Is it perfect? No. But again, it's the best possible outcome we could have come to. And this test plan is going to provide assurances that while we continue to have innovation in unlicensed spectrum, the critical role that Wi-Fi plays around the world today can be maintained. The test plan covers a diverse set of scenarios, including indoor situations where you have very strong signals, including kind of mixed environments where you may have indoor networks overlapping with outdoor networks. I know, Josh, you covered just a number of those that are very real in New York City's deployments. And it also includes acknowledgement that there are a diverse set of Wi-Fi devices out there. We include multiple vendors, we include legacy technologies as part of the coexistence baseline. And all of those pieces, again, came through the multi-vendor, multi-stakeholder collaboration effort. Now, the test plan that we developed is focused on LTE-U, not LAA. As you may or may not know, there's a parallel effort going on within 3GPP and RAN 4 to develop conformance and additional testing for LAA, and that is the preferred venue for development of that testing. Where the Wi-Fi Alliance test plan comes in is for those devices that are not on that LAA track. So our expectation is that LTE devices operating in unlicensed will use one of these two test regimens to ensure that they do not hamper the Wi-Fi experience. So here's the point I think everybody was really wondering about at the beginning, and that is simply that Wi-Fi Alliance is not seeking a regulatory solution. From the very beginning, I think we were adamant that it was important to allow unlicensed spectrum to continue to serve as that as that garden for innovation, and we knew that there could be very real unintended consequences, which is why it was critical for industry to solve this, and it's why Wi-Fi Alliance was committed to an industry solution and avoiding regulatory involvement. So given that, what we will be doing instead is playing a very strong role in promoting the use of the Wi-Fi test plan. We are going to encourage service providers in particular to use this plan to determine whether the equipment that they're purchasing and the equipment they intend to deploy is going to meet and adhere to those shared principles that everybody came together on early on in the process. Now going forward, Wi-Fi Alliance is finalizing qualification of independent third-party laboratories who actually conduct the testing based on this test plan we developed. And we expect that those third-party labs will soon begin testing of LTE equipment. And with that, I think you'll see Wi-Fi's role shift a little bit. Of course, we've served as a forum for this work, but we fully understand that the optics of us playing a very prominent role in the testing itself is problematic and could raise questions. So once these test houses are ready and operating, our role will instead focus on maintaining the quality and the integrity of the testing. These test organizations are, their business is based on their credibility and based on their credibility and in how they're viewed. So they're going to own the actual compilation of the results and the determination of fairness, with Wi-Fi Alliance solely playing a role in quality assurance. And just, I guess, to summarize and kind of close out, this point is really, again, just highlighting the value of the coexistence test effort and the test plan that came out of this effort. We encourage, particularly service providers, to ensure that their LTE devices can coexist with Wi-Fi and share unlicensed spectrum fairly. And the test plan just recently released is really going to be an invaluable tool for device vendors and service providers to deliver on their commitments to share spectrum fairly, and will really allow them to improve how their deployments coexist with Wi-Fi networks, with, of course, the primary consideration that unlicensed spectrum will continue to benefit consumers, enterprises, and pretty much every aspect of our lives going forward. So again, I thank you, Michael, for inviting us, and I look forward to what I'm sure will be a lively discussion about some of the specifics of the test effort. Thank you again.
Thanks, Kevin, and I hope that demystified the coexistence testing for everyone. So with that background, we'll have our panel come up, and as they get seated, to save time, I'll just run through who these folks are. But you have, as I mentioned, short bios in the handout, which if you didn't get one, I'm sure are still outside there, and you can refer back to those. So on the far side, and easiest way, we'll just come right straight down in terms of a couple minutes of opening remarks. And so first will be Chris Szymanski, who is the Director of Global Regulatory Trade Compliance and International Government Relations for Broadcom, which is, I think, the largest Wi-Fi chip maker, or one of the couple largest Wi-Fi chip makers.
One of the largest, I would say, in terms of volume, yeah.
Right, in the world, so they know Wi-Fi. Patrick Welsh is Assistant Vice President of Federal Regulatory Affairs at Verizon, where he focuses on spectrum and technology policy. And Verizon, and then you'll hear T-Mobile as well, are among the seem to be like among the first two mobile carriers that are anxious to deploy LTE-U. Third, David Don, who is Vice President for Regulatory Policy at Comcast, where he helps to implement Comcast's strategy on the latest broadband and wireless issues of the day. Steve Sharkey, Vice President for Government Affairs, Engineering, and Tech Policy at T-Mobile, where he has overall responsibility for the Un-carrier's tech policy agenda. And finally, Harold Feld, Senior Vice President at Public Knowledge, which I think you all know is the National Consumer Advocacy Organization that works at the intersection of copyright, telecom, and the internet, and very effectively, I might add. So starting with Chris, you may want to repeat your names as you go along so people remember, and you can either do it from your seat or come up here, either way, but just a couple minutes.
Thanks, Michael. I'll be brief. I recognize that Broadcom's not a household name here in Washington, D.C., so I just want to give you a quick elevator soundbite on who we are. We're a Fortune 300 global leader in wired and wireless communications semiconductors. Over a period of like 10, 12 years, we bought a lot of companies. We're very, very acquisitive until we met a bigger fish that bought us back in February. So we're now about $4 billion in revenue per quarter, and we focus in 19 different verticals. So I can safely say that we're one of the broadest telecommunications semiconductor companies in the world. We estimate that 99.98% of all internet traffic, all data, crosses at least one of our chips. So I'm guessing that 0.02% is in North Korea. I'm not sure. But we have a meaningful presence in every segment, whether it's in your home, in your hand, or in the infrastructure. And so it's really important that we think through handoff, going from one network to another, going from wired to wireless. So coexistence and that transition is very, very important, and that network behavior is very, very important in delivering the kind of user experience that Josh was talking about earlier. And so from a Broadcom WLAN perspective, I work for Team WLAN. My role has changed. I'm in product marketing now, so it's Go Wi-Fi for me. But Broadcom shipped its first 11G product back in 2003. And since then, we've shipped billions and billions of Wi-Fi devices. So a lot of those devices that are in the market, that are in your hand, are Broadcom products. We're very, very concerned about the user experience. As we've evolved in the standards, whether it's 11G, pick your alphabet soup, but as we've improved the Wi-Fi performance, we focused on delivering better products over range. So it was originally a really local area networking technology, sort of center of the room, and it's evolved into the sort of use cases that Josh described, where you have an indoor hotspot delivering outdoor coverage. Well, in order to do that, you need to be able to improve the signaling environment, to be able to take advantage of those lower level signals. And so that range extension is really what's made Wi-Fi perfect for whole home coverage, for the Internet of Things, for Nest smoke detectors. You're no longer concerned about the center of the room, that dongle that's connected to your TV. That might be shielded from your Wi-Fi hotspot. So by the time you get the signal to that TV, it's going to be lower level. Broadcom's very, very concerned about that whole user experience. And that's really what motivated us to get involved into this LTE-U LAA debate. We're actively involved in all of the standards bodies that are working on this in 3GPP for the standardized version, in IEEE in response to concerns related to LAA and LTE-U and how to improve the Wi-Fi technology, and the coexistence testing that Kevin discussed. And we've really been focused on that user experience, that uniform user experience that people rely on. So kind of thinking through our views on this Wi-Fi Alliance test plan, and just to be brief, Kevin's right. There were a variety of compromises, and I can tell you that Broadcom was not happy with several of those compromises. We were very vocal in expressing our concerns. And some of those concerns, we think that there are use cases that weren't identified and that there's going to be some harm that wouldn't be identified. However, we do think that it is a good plan. If taken on the whole, it will identify if there's harm from an LTE network to a Wi-Fi network when it's operating in the same spectrum. So what's important to us is that it's taken in a whole, meaning it's the whole complete plan and you're not picking and choosing unique parts, and that it's implemented correctly. It's important to us that it's implemented by certified labs that do a very, very good job at controlling for features that are completely unrelated for coexistence, so that the integrity of the plan is maintained. And so, we look forward to working with Wi-Fi Alliance and others as this plan is rolled out, so that we can ensure that there's some integrity in the plan and in the process, and that the last year and a half's worth of work is fruitful. Thank you.
So I think I'll just have my comments here. So I'll be brief because I know folks want to hear the panel discussion and hopefully have some time for Q&A. Michael mentioned the looming spectrum crunch that never happened, and he attributed not happening to Wi-Fi. And while Wi-Fi has played a big part in making sure that you can continue to connect to the internet and have faster and faster speeds, it's only part of the picture. Carriers like Verizon and T-Mobile have invested billions of dollars in our network to add cell sites, upgrade technologies, add spectrum, add Wi-Fi, to make sure that your experience is seamless and you don't think about whether or not you're going to have coverage or not. It's effortless. So it's part of the way that we evolved our network and planned to densify our network. We wanted to not only look at new technologies and adding new cell sites, but really think creatively of what can we do to marshal the latest trends and latest technologies to improve our customers' experience, broadband experience. We looked at Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is a fantastic technology. As I think Michael said, 8 billion Wi-Fi devices worldwide. But it does have its limitations. I mean, I think we've all experienced being in a hotel where it shows that we have full Wi-Fi strength, but we can't download an email, let alone surf the internet. We've all been on a train, Amtrak, and try to connect to the Wi-Fi connection there, and we really don't have any connectivity or very minimal connectivity. So the challenge for us is we thought of how we can scale that technology up. Wi-Fi just wasn't there right now. We hope that in the future, in the next release, that it will be, but that's not going to be finalized until maybe 2017 or even 2018. So we thought, what can we do now to get ahead of this curve, ahead of this flood? And we looked at LTE, and we put a bunch of really smart engineers in the room from our vendors, and the end result was LTE unlicensed, or LTE-U, right? Now, the most important thing to remember is LTE isn't just plain old vanilla LTE that you use on licensed spectrum. If we had deployed that kind of technology in unlicensed, it would have been devastating. It would have made all of Chris's concerns come true. LTE, out of the box, that's used on licensed technologies, would just keep talking, and it wouldn't allow any other technology to talk or to transmit. So what our engineers did is they developed a suite of etiquette protocols designed to make LTE unlicensed polite, and in fact, as polite as Wi-Fi. Now, it's important. It does it in a different way. It doesn't use the same etiquette protocols that Wi-Fi does. But that shouldn't matter. It's the end results. at the end of the day, what did the test results show? Because in the unlicensed space, the FCC has very wisely tried to make unlicensed technologies or unlicensed spectrum technology agnostic. It's not designed for any one particular technology. It's not designed for Wi-Fi, although it's been hugely successful. It's not designed only for Bluetooth. It's not designed only for microwave ovens or baby monitors. It's supposed to be a commons, as Michael says, that any technology that meets very minimal requirements can then be used. And that the design there is really to lower the barriers to entry and to make it affordable for folks to use spectrum. So while LTE-U and LAA don't use the same etiquette protocols that Wi-Fi does, in fact, no other unlicensed technology does. Bluetooth does something different than Wi-Fi. Zigbee does something different. LTE-U will do something different. That doesn't mean that it's a bad technology. You need to look at the results and see how it performs. And all of the performance testing that Verizon and T-Mobile and our vendors have done shows unequivocally that LTE-U is as polite to Wi-Fi as Wi-Fi is to itself. So we're very excited to have the Wi-Fi Alliance test plan finalized. We're hoping to deploy LTE-U later this year and then quickly deploy LAA sometime next year.
Hi, I'm Mike. Thanks for having me here today and to New America. Maybe picking up a little bit on what Patrick said, I think it dovetails into some of the remarks I'd want to make. We've assumed a lot of folks in this audience already have a lot of the background here, but I want to sort of highlight maybe how did we get here, and picking up on the title of this panel, or subtitle is, can the FCC, Can the FCC avoid the spectrum, a tragedy of the spectrum commons? And I'll start with, it's probably the industry's obligation first to avoid the tragedy of the spectrum commons. And when you look at the 5 gigahertz band and what Wi-Fi has done over the last 20 years, it's really almost a miracle. No one would have predicted. I think a lot of economists in our space and even technologists would have thought there's no way you could have gotten such intensive use out of these unlicensed bands. They were called for many years the garbage bands. And the question is, well, what happened, right? And what didn't happen was the government picking technologies. It didn't pick winners and losers. It didn't pick 802.11. The industry got together on its own and developed a standard that would allow everyone to maximize utilization of this spectrum. And by creating what's called 802.11, and we're now probably on the 5th or 6th version of that, we've been able to take what were these garbage bands and create real gold. And the gold is not just Wi-Fi, but it's really broadband connectivity. Everything in Josh's presentation earlier, Wi-Fi is great and it's essential to what he's trying to accomplish, but the real value is coming from what that Wi-Fi delivers. And it's delivering the internet. And everything the internet brings to us, we're familiar with. Everyone in this room obviously has studied it and thought about it, whether it's the civic engagement or the commerce or the education, which is a big part of what Josh's saying. But Wi-Fi is that critical tool that no one would have thought was possible 20, 25 years ago when the FCC used to pick specific licenses and specific applications that would work in there. So how did this happen? Was the private sector coming together in a group through public standards bodies, working together to figure out a way to coexist for all of these devices to work together. So how did we get to this problem and this issue we're at today? I think Patrick's presentation touches on it. He said, and he noted, and correct Patrick, if I don't want to put words in your mouth, but Verizon got together with T-Mo and some of the vendors and developed what essentially was a private solution that they wanted to do, that they felt met the Part 15 standards, which I'm not disputing that, but didn't meet where our expectations are today in society 20 years later with these unlicensed bands. With the expectation that all in industry come together through transparent bodies, working together, devise solutions that work for everyone. And that's how you avoid the tragedy of the commons. But what we had in this situation was this private technology development and the unilateral release by a subgroup of telecom players to declare how they intend to use these bands. And perhaps fully compliant with the regulations, but no longer really compliant with the customs and norms of not just the US policy, but really global policy. And it was that failure to meet those customs and norms, to work together, to develop solutions, that really led to this breakdown. And it's that breakdown which then forced us, all of us concerned about Wi-Fi policy and spectrum policy and broadband policy, to bring in government officials like the FCC and those on Capitol Hill and the administration who care about broadband policy. Luckily, I think those in government understood that the importance of spectrum policy in the unlicensed bands doesn't start and end at Part 15, that it was important for industry to come up with a solution that leads to coexistence. There was support on both sides of the aisle for this. So a lot of pressure from public policy officials, I think, led to the folks in that LTE-U forum to move off of their unilateralism and to come work together with stakeholders in the Wi-Fi Alliance to develop a real coexistence solution. We are generally satisfied with the way the process worked. The issues are primarily process. I think there were some issues around LTE-U and the impact it would have on Wi-Fi. I think the Wi-Fi Alliance process revealed that. But we're optimistic now going forward that we have a solution to ensure that Wi-Fi and new technologies coexist. Wi-Fi is very different than some of these other technologies we're talking about, like Zigbee. It is broadband connectivity, the #1 policy priority for this country. So it's important that we ensure that all these new technologies coexist well together. And to do that, we need to continue to work together in open forums. So hopefully, we've moved beyond some of these practices, and now we have a path forward.
So thanks, Michael, for having me here. This is an interesting discussion and important, and I'm glad we have a chance to get together. You know, Michael started off with kind of saying that this has only come about because to date, the carrier community and the unlicensed community have existed in parallel and in different bands of spectrum, and only now we're coming together. And I don't agree with that at all. We have been involved in unlicensed for many years. We've worked hard to make it part of the success that it is, making sure that it's implemented in devices, that our customers have ready access to it, widely deployed. You know, we drove Wi-Fi, calling over Wi-Fi. It's an integral part of our service that our customers use and enjoy. And it's, you know, and it's important to us to maintain that. So, you know, and I agree a lot with what Kevin was talking about a shared principle of making sure that both in the Wi-Fi community and the carrier community that coexistence in this band was important and that we wouldn't have a negative impact on Wi-Fi. And frankly, I think a lot of this debate has not been about whether, well, it's probably not true, but has not really been about whether or not what we do would harm Wi-Fi, but proving it, right? So this wasn't about developing a coexistence plan, like Don said. It's been about demonstrating that these devices do coexist. And whether or not this was the right process or not to do that, you know, I think there are different ways that it could have been done, and we are where we are. We're very happy to have the coexistence plan in place and to be moving forward and hope that we can move forward quickly. I also don't think this is a tragedy of the commons. I think that's a misuse of the tragedy of the commons term. I view that as, and have always viewed it as, when you've got a common good, people will use it without investing resources to making it better and to use that resource more efficiently. And that is a huge difference from what we're doing. We're actually, you know, as carriers, we are investing in more efficient use of the radio spectrum, including the Wi-Fi bands, and investing in new technology there, the same way that the Wi-Fi community is. This is an evolution of use of spectrum, and you know, yes, Wi-Fi has been a huge success there that we totally support. There are also a lot of other technologies that you know, that use this spectrum and that go outside of the standards bodies that you know, have not taken into account the need to coexist with Wi-Fi like we've done. So I think we take coexistence very seriously and are committed to making sure that Wi-Fi remains an open option to our customers, and that their experience is augmented by the benefits that LTE-U can bring in a more cohesive way with our carrier spectrum to provide the large bandwidth that customers need, and that we need to be able to provide to our customers as we see their demand continue to spike. So I look forward to more discussion here, but I think that I do think we have a shared principle of making sure that this resource remains available.
So I'm Harold Feld with Public Knowledge. Not having a product in the market allows me to do something which everybody else here can't do, which is to step back from the specific issue that's in front of us right now and look at this from a broader policy perspective, because I'm free of the concern of how am I going to get a product to market, or how am I going to avoid having problems with my product that's in the market. And the first thing that I want to point out is this is not a unique problem. We have 4 or 5 different FCC proceedings right now that are all coming out of the same general problem, which is the nature of wireless has changed. It has gotten a lot more complicated. It has gotten a lot more intermixed. It has gotten a lot more competitive from different angles. The old way of looking at things, which, when we started out in broadcast was, well, there's a licensee and they do broadcast, and the goal is to make sure that they don't interfere with each other. Then it became, well, okay, we have licensed wireless that are doing a lot of very interesting things, so we want to introduce flexibility. And we also have this unlicensed, which produces a different kind of flexibility. And now we're merging all these things together. And it's a very crowded world. So how do we make sure that nothing crashes and burns, and at the same time we still allow for all kinds of interesting innovation and moving forward? That means rethinking things like, what does it mean when we say Part 15 devices are not entitled to interference protection? Because on the one hand, we all agree that, yeah, if I want the individualized protection for this device, then companies pay for it. If I want to use this with a free input, generally open spectrum, I don't pay for it. I generally say, well, okay, then I'm not entitled to the same type of interference. That's an individual device. That's a distinction that made sense 15, 20 years ago. When we're talking about something that can potentially wipe out major protocols or devices or technologies on which millions of people and billions of dollars of economic transactions are dependent, it becomes a very different kind of equation. And to pretend that, well, Part 15 says no protection, so too bad, is to say, all right, let's have a major crisis, and then a panicked mob is going to make a rule that nobody's going to like. Because the reality is, if you switch something on that starts to screw up all of the good stuff that we were talking about before, even if you didn't mean it, then people are going to want something done. So what we've discovered so far is, yeah, generally, the role of the FCC is not the old command and control idea of determining precisely what each wireless provider, what each device does, and limiting it to a particular set of purposes so that everything is nice and orderly and we know how things work with predictability. It's not the concept of what is interference and what is harmful interference, and what does it mean to have these devices all working together and not interfering with each other is in flux. But what the FCC did do here, and does pretty well, is to help to set the framework for this kind of self-policing. So one of the reasons we had this process was, frankly, if anybody can remember back from like 2 years ago when we started it, was not that suddenly everybody woke up and said, let us all gather together and be reasonable about this. No, you had companies who wanted to take a product to market. They did their own development. They said, we think we've done a good job. We've complied with the rules. Let's get this out there. Everybody else who is dependent upon the existing Wi-Fi technology said, whoa, 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 whoa. We got a lot of things that we're worried about. And the reason why we moved to this process was because the FCC, in its role as the traffic cop in this, said, you know, there are a lot of very good questions here. Why don't you all go try to answer them? So that is what brought people to the table in the first place, and that is, to some degree, what has kept people at the table through times that have been very contentious, which is suitable for a contention-based protocol, I suppose, but you know, that where we have had you know, these issues, one of the reasons why people stick around and don't say, well, just screw it, I'm going to go put this out because I think it's good enough, which is the traditional Part 15 approach, was the recognition of it's actually better for us to work within this environment and come up with something that is manageable than it is to have to ask the FCC to weigh in. Now, as I've said, there are a whole bunch of other proceedings that present similar problems. The DSRC 5.9 gigahertz problem is the same problem, but in reverse. That's the, well, we want to do sharing, we want to be more efficient, you know, the technology is there, and the incumbents are saying, oh, no, no, a single dB of interference will mean the difference of life or death for our passengers. Again, what we want is a process that is going to work this out. How do you get incumbents who are not part of this industry, who don't have the same incentives, to come together and work together to figure out how we can manage this? Global Star is another example. I can go through a couple of other examples, but they all relate to the same idea. It's a very crowded world, and we're adjusting our expectations for how these things are going to work together, which is why I think that, you know, what has happened here is a very good example of how the FCC, in its role of sort of general adult supervision, going to 3GPP to see the development of the LAA standard, being the organization that is sort of looking at how the Wi-Fi Alliance stuff, it lends, first of all, it helps to bring people together, and second, when the process works, it gives a stamp and seal of reassurance to everybody that, okay, there was a process, it was inclusive. What I would like to see going forward, not just for LTE LAA, but generally, is for the FCC to be the leader in rethinking this paradigm, to clearly delineate its authority, revisiting, you know, saying, yeah, Part 15, we want it to be innovative. At the same time, we're going to recognize that you can't just wipe out an entire technology because individual devices aren't entitled to protection. But at the same time, you're not licensed. Deal with it. There is no protection for your business model. There is no protection, you know, for an individual device. And also, we don't know that Wi-Fi is the best of all possible ways to go. I mean, one of the issues that comes up in this that's particular, and then I'll stop, is what's the right contention-based protocol? Should it be listen before talk, like Wi-Fi? Should it be duty cycle? Are there other ways of doing this? One of the purposes of Part 15 is to allow for experimentation and innovation around this very question. But at the same time, we all have to recognize that unlike 15 years ago, when there wasn't a lot happening in this space, now there is a lot happening in this space. And so we can't just go out and do whatever tests we want. We need to have a safety net to make it a little less, it may be a little less innovative, but that is frankly the cost of everybody being able to live together and get all the amazing benefits of working it out together.
Okay, well, thanks. I think you all have gotten a actually a fairly comprehensive sense of the landscape of perspectives on this issue. So we have a little, some discussion. I'm going to ask a few questions and then, you know, turn to you all and see if you have any questions or comments. And you know, and I'll ask, I think for all of this, you know, ask the panel to be, you know, very snappy in their answers so that we can cover a lot of ground, and not everyone needs to answer every question. But it's just a question of getting in more questions. So, so I think that, perhaps a good place to start on this coexistence is, Kevin said that the Wi-Fi Alliance expects that all devices, all LTE on unlicensed devices will use one of the two tests, right? Either this Wi-Fi Alliance test or the test that's being developed through the global cellular standards body, 3GPP, and the European Union organization, ETSI. So I guess I could start by asking Patrick and Steve, will you make sure that any devices you deploy are tested under one or the other, either under the WFA coexistence test or the coexistence test being developed by RAND 4 and 3GPP?
So Verizon is still reviewing the Wi-Fi Alliance test plan. There were significant changes made at the end, but we anticipate that all LTE-U equipment would undergo that testing and pass before it's deployed. And the same would go for LAA. We anticipate that all LAA devices will fully comply with release 13 of 3GPP. And hopefully get on to the next generation technology.
So that's LAA will be coming later.
Yes.
Yeah. Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I think the point of this is that, to the extent coexistence has been a question, we want to make sure that those devices do coexist and live up to what we expect them to do. So the test plan is an important part of that, and we expect devices will demonstrate that they coexist fairly. Whether they're LTE-U or LAA, which would comply with release 13. And we do require manufacturers, we are not deploying equipment that doesn't comply with standards.
Okay. Well, one thing I wanted to dig into a bit is, what does it mean to coexist fairly? So, we heard Josh Breitbart at the very beginning when he's showing the coverage corridors that are anticipated for up to 10,000 Wi-Fi hotspot kiosks, gigabit kiosks up and down. I've already seen them and used them up and down 8th Avenue and so on in New York, and New York is investing millions and millions of taxpayer dollars to do all this, and in the schools, libraries, public housing projects, and so on. So, So Josh expressed a concern that that the coverage areas might shrink. So, and it seems that the impact on the Wi-Fi ecosystem will depend to some significant degree on the extent to which LTE-U listens for medium to low power signals, and vice versa. So, I don't know, I could start with Chris, and whoever else wants to chime in on this is, I'm wondering kind of a couple things, is what is the implications of, because I know this was probably one of the very most contentious issues in this process, is what are the implications of the signal detection threshold that was arrived at, right? This, I believe it's minus 72 dBm for you engineers. And then the fact that the European group in ETSI, right, the 3GPP it seems to be going toward a different detection threshold that's lower even, at minus 82 dBm for LAA. Or if I'm wrong, explain that. The other way around. Okay, I'm sorry.
So I think, from a Broadcom perspective, when we talk about some of these proceedings that Harold discussed, it's all about mutual recognition. I go into the room and I understand, what is this other technology trying to accomplish? So in Wi-Fi coexisting well with DSRC, can we mutually recognize transmissions of these signals at lower levels? If I can recognize what that signal is trying to accomplish at the range it's trying to accomplish it, I can coexist. If I cannot recognize it, I'm going to be creating harmful interference. Same thing with Wi-Fi and LTE-U. It's important that LTE-U understands what Wi-Fi is trying to accomplish. Wi-Fi is trying to accomplish two things: range and throughput, capacity. Okay? And so it's important to understand what sort of range is Wi-Fi trying to work at? Where does it work well at? And it works well, and it's beginning to work better at lower level signals. I mean, we've all experienced what Patrick talked about earlier, horrible quality of service with Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi industry hasn't been idle. We're spending tons of engineering hours working on improving that user experience so that at that lower level signal, you still get a uniform experience and it doesn't take a decade for your web page to load. If there's interference at that lower level signal, it sets us back. All of those engineering hours, everything that we've done leading up to this point to make this a better use. So I think it's understanding that Wi-Fi uses the same frequency for throughput and for range. And when we're thinking about range and the value of range, I think the carrier should take a look at, well, what sort of range are they trying to get on their cellular network? At what point is the edge of network for their licensed cellular network? Is it minus 72 dBm? Then peace. Is it minus 82 dBm? Then peace. Is it minus 90 dBm? Right? And so understanding that the cellular carriers are seeking to get broad range on their licensed network at minus 90, thinking through, okay, Wi-Fi uses this network to get range, and kind of think through, all right, well, am I going to recognize those Wi-Fi signals at lower levels? That's what coexistence means to Broadcom.
So can I say, I mean, I think, Michael, your question, what is fair coexistence, right?
Yeah,
So, right, so, which I think the word fair in there is a pretty critical word. And that was one of the things that I think, and you know, the Wi-Fi Alliance did do, I think, a good job of coming out with a product here. And part of that is to develop a baseline of Wi-Fi devices, multi-vendor Wi-Fi baseline to determine how Wi-Fi coexists with itself. Because frankly, we all use the same bandwidth and power levels to, you know, it's the same trade-off for everybody, right? Range versus capacity. We all want to cover as far as possible. So there's nothing magic there, and that's always been going on. So the question is really, what is fair coexistence, and are we coexisting in a way that is similar to what a Wi-Fi device coexists in that same environment? And so I think that'll be the critical part of determining a baseline to determine, you know, is the impact of an LTE-U device comparable to what a Wi-Fi device is in the band.
And this also, though, is where it gets interesting, because in both the licensed space and the unlicensed space, where you have players that are similar to each other, have the same cost structures, have the same incentives, you encounter similar problems. So every licensed carrier on their licensed side of their network has had to deal with, as we ramp up service and we get more customers, how do we take the spectrum that we have and use it more efficiently in order to be able to support that customer base? Because unless, you know, spectrum auctions happen rarely, and yes, sometimes you just need more spectrum. That's the only answer. But even within that, you know, the licensed wireless industry, Verizon, you know, T-Mobile and others, spend lots and lots of time and lots of money figuring out how you support 100 million users rather than just 10 million users, and how you manage to maintain the efficiency of that service. Wi-Fi also, different set of approaches, because you're dealing primarily with device manufacturers rather than service providers who control from end to end, are also, as we just heard, dealing with this problem. The more Wi-Fi enabled devices that come on, the more they impact each other, but the more the industry manufacturers and the industry standard bodies have incentive to work that out so that they can sell more devices that will operate more efficiently. The challenge that occurs here is that the nature of the solutions and the way about thinking about the problems are very different in the licensed universe and the unlicensed universe. So when we take a baseline now about how a Wi-Fi, an unlicensed device, impacts another unlicensed device, that's an important piece of information to know. The question becomes, as we start scaling up, is there going to be the same incentive in the LTE-U universe to employ the same kinds of engineering and efficiency solutions as we see generally in the Wi-Fi universe as the number of Wi-Fi devices scales up. That's not a good, bad, destructive thing. It's an interesting question. It's one of the things that gets people concerned, and one of the things that I flag not as the, we have to solve that problem definitively now, but that we have to recognize we're going to take a baseline now. The universe is going to continue to change. There's going to be a need for constant cooperation among the players to make sure that everything works efficiently. And let's face it, the wireless guys have incentive to make sure LTE-U works efficiently, that it doesn't get degraded in its service, because once they've incorporated that into their service offering, they're going to want to keep using it because traffic is going up for everybody. So what does coexistence mean? I just want to flag that is coexistence in part means an ongoing dialogue among this expanded set of stakeholders as the wireless universe continues to evolve to continue to work together. And we can't be thinking of this as a one and done, come back 5 years from now when there's problems and have finger pointing. We need to recognize that it's going to have to continue to be evolutionary in the same way that it has been for both industries independently.
If I can add on to what Harold said, because he makes a really good point. It is an evolutionary process. And one of the things that we were surprised about is when trying to define what is fair coexistence, we looked at Wi-Fi first, and there is no coexistence test for Wi-Fi, right? And so right now, under the Wi-Fi Alliance test plan, LTE-U will protect Wi-Fi 100 times more sensitively than Wi-Fi will protect LTE-U or any other technology, right? So to Harold's point, I think it's important going forward to make sure that those standards are improved, that we have a race to the top rather than a race to the bottom.
Can I touch on that? Because this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Number of Wi-Fi devices deployed in America, over 1 billion. Number of LTE-U and LAA devices deployed in America, 0. You've already got an ecosystem here. In this ecosystem, how many other wireless technologies are considered broadband technologies in 5 gigahertz? How many other, can you guys name off any other broadband technologies, wireless technologies in 5 gigahertz? We've got Wi-Fi, okay? So there hasn't really been a need to take a look at coexistence with other devices up to this point. This would be relatively new as we talk about the emergence of new devices. Wi-Fi ensures fair coexistence 2 ways. Energy detection, which is just raw energy, and then another, understanding the waveform of other Wi-Fi devices. This isn't a secret. This is embedded in billions of Wi-Fi devices around the globe. The LTE designers understood this. It's pretty cheap to implement. Okay, I want to hear this Wi-Fi signal. I can do it at a strong level, a high quality of service, down at a lower level, and then I can protect adjacent networks. And this is something that the LTE designers chose not to incorporate, this mutual detection at lower levels. So I think that rather than talking about a race to the bottom, I think this is a little bit of a race to the bottom because you're going to have interference now below -72, whereas you wouldn't have had interference if it had injected or put in a Wi-Fi preamble or other form of mutual recognition technology at -82. So we're going to now have collisions and no way to traffic manage at these lower level signals when you could do it in the past.
I would disagree that there was no reason to look at coexistence in this band before we started to look at LTE-U. I mean, Wi-Fi to Wi-Fi interference has been well known for a long time. I think we've probably all been in, very dense areas with a lot of Wi-Fi access points where you can't even use the Wi-Fi, right? So if the community is concerned about the quality of Wi-Fi and the performance, if Josh wants his system to perform as well as possible and not get interference, the biggest interferer out there right now is Wi-Fi to Wi-Fi. So as David Don deploys his wireless commercial service, just because he's using Wi-Fi rather than LTE-U, is that a reason that you differentiate on technology when the real issue is what are the range of devices in there and how do they coexist? So I think Patrick's point on having some kind of a coexistence, performance evaluation on Wi-Fi is certainly a fair one.
I think, though, that my point is kind of almost the opposite, which is, yeah, the Wi-Fi guys have been thinking about it. And it's sort of funny to me that we see this kind of discussion going, or it illustrates my point, that we see this discussion going past each other because of the different mechanisms that the two industries are used to employing to look at this same problem. Because there has been an enormous amount of effort to deal with Wi-Fi to Wi-Fi interference. Based on the structure of the industry, it has focused more on finer detection, on varying forms of cooperation for in-network devices, for potentials for voluntary cooperation between devices that have different owners. So it's not fair to say there hasn't been work on this problem any more than it's fair to say that the licensed industry doesn't work on a coexistence problem because, well, you got this exclusive use spectrum, so you're just wasteful. No, because you are all working on it all the time to improve the number of devices that can be supported by the same 10 megahertz block. So, but the fact is, you're each doing things that are so different from each other, and the universe in how these problems get solved is so different from each other that when you look at it, you're saying to yourself, well, you never had to deal with this problem. Well, you're just not dealing with this problem at all. And that's the place where I think the next stage of coexistence is really going to be necessary in terms of each industry having a better understanding of the nature of the unwritten rules that each industry has developed internally for trying to resolve these problems with itself, and figuring out how those mechanisms overlap now at the intersection.
So I want to get at this from one other direction before and then open it up to the audience, which is the role of the FCC. So a little bit more on that from, we heard a little of that from Harold, but so Chairman Wheeler delayed certification of LTE-U this past year. He called on the industry to get together to collaborate on technical solutions to coexistence. And so we have this big positive step forward with the Wi-Fi Alliance testing, which we just heard. On Friday, the FCC went ahead and actually certified an LAA device submitted by Qualcomm, but simultaneously put out Julie Knapp, the head of that Office of Engineering Technology, put out a blog post saying that the commission will avoid any detrimental impact on consumers and will be monitoring. So should the FCC, I think we take it for granted that they'll be monitoring, but should the FCC be doing anything else at this point, or when should they? Ask David and then anyone else.
So with respect to this specific issue, we believe the FCC should make full utilization of the Wi-Fi Alliance test plan. It was through their encouragement that industry came together, thousands and thousands of hours, engineering hours by everyone on this panel and others, went into producing this test plan. And it would be a shame if the FCC walked away from it and didn't make sure that it was a key component in looking at coexistence with respect to LTE-U devices. And a broader question, though, is, and we're talking about some of this here, it's the FCC's interest. First of all, it has to act in the public interest, so it has a role here, much more beyond what is written in its CFR, in Part 15 of the CFR, to ensure that this environment, this unlicensed environment, continues to use the spectrum efficiently and fully, and ensure that it continues to be an important tool for broadband access in this country. So with that, I took solace in Julie Knapp's comments that he'll continue to monitor the deployment of this. But the FCC absolutely has a role to play to ensure that this unlicensed environment continues to work well, and we don't end up with the tragedy of the commons that we know can happen. I mean, the situation here, interestingly, if LTE-U had not gone through this, if we didn't have this discussion and it was deployed, and it did create harm to Wi-Fi, the response would be that the Wi-Fi community would start coming up with tools from itself to start protecting itself and to harming potentially LTE-U. And then you do get this race to the bottom, whether there would be adjustments made to power levels or how it listens before it talks. All of these things would be changed, and we'd be getting into this arms warfare, and we'd get back in 5 years calling this the junk bans again. So the FCC does have a role, and I think it used its influence here, its bully pulpit here, to force industry to get together. It ultimately can choose not to approve devices that it believes do not further the public interest. And so we think the FCC has a role to continue to monitor and push parties and ensure that they understand that Part 15 is the beginning but not the end when you're talking about, to Steve's point, broad, scale deployments that the carriers are contemplating for LTE-U as opposed to, Zigbee light bulbs and things like that.
There won't be a broad deployment of Zigbee light bulbs, but I actually think the commission probably did the right thing here, and as much as we would have liked to have moved forward more quickly and had a process to move forward more quickly, but they do have a role of making sure that there's a cooperative environment, and I think the way they did it of pushing the industry to work together to resolve these problems and to study the problem is probably ultimately a good approach. I will, I think, again, kind of the Wi-Fi Alliance made an important point, and Kevin, your point in your statement that you're not calling for a regulatory mandate, and that is key, right? These bands and the technology and the growth of Wi-Fi has been through permissionless innovation in these bands, and we should make sure that we're not stopping that and not locking ourselves into a snapshot in time in what we're protecting. So, I appreciate that, and I appreciate that it's an encouragement to use the test plan and to cooperate fully to make sure that the environment remains a usable, satisfactory environment for everybody. But I don't think the FCC should, start mandating this. I think it would be a bad precedent for what has been essentially a voluntary process to overlay on top of a regulatory process. I think they're very different and should be approached differently, and we shouldn't mix those two.
Okay, well, let's see if there's any questions out here. And I also want to say you can also ask a question of Josh Breitbart or Kevin Robinson, who were up first, but I didn't want to delay the panel by having them take questions at the beginning. So if there's anything for them, Josh, you have something?
Yeah, I just quickly want to respond to that question, that item about the FCC. This needs to be pointed out that the standard setting bodies like the Wi-Fi Alliance and 3GPP their members are industry. And there are conflicts within those industries and between those sectors that need to be worked out, and those standard setting bodies are incredibly helpful for that. And it's the work of Wi-Fi Alliance here in convening that is fantastic. But there are other stakeholders in this process, including cities like the City of New York, and the FCC as a forum is suited to hear from all of those stakeholders. So that's a key role that the FCC plays in a process like this, to hear from other stakeholders outside of industry. And those stakeholders may be innovating in a manner that's not technological. It might be social or economic or civic. And the FCC should be weighing all of those factors, as well as the technical considerations that the standard setting bodies work out.
I think when New York City sent a letter to the 3GPP, they had never heard from a municipality before and were unsure how to incorporate that into their analysis. So that's a very good point.
Yeah, I think it's also a good point when you consider that, unlike here in the United States, we talked about license-assisted access, LAA, the other flavor of unlicensed LTE, which is developing through a global industry standards body, 3GPP. But guess what they have to do? They have to then, it's now subject to approval by the European Union. They're running it through, they did their standard to comply with the public interest as it's seen by the governments of Europe. So now it's in what they call ETSI for approval by, in a sense, the European FCC. So we're actually much more hands-off here than they are in Europe, for better or for worse.
Well, I mean, the standards bodies have to take into account regulations from around the world, right? So as 3GPP looks at it, whether it's in 700 megahertz when the FCC adopted an interoperability requirement, and that everybody's got to deploy band 12 devices rather than band 17, and that all gets taken into consideration.
Oh, sure. Well, they wanted ultimately to harmonize internationally.
But to my point, in the U.S., we're going to benefit by the higher protection standards in Europe.
I guess just one quick add-on. It'll be very, very brief. It'd be a mistake to look at this process as the end, but really the beginning. So we've all worked hard to get there. So what should the FCC do? They should continue to apply very close scrutiny and oversight in the process. I mean, things like this can go off the rails on either direction. There could be things that would irritate the LTE-U community and things that could irritate the Wi-Fi community. And ensuring that you have honest brokers that are fulfilling the obligations as they're understood are a very important part of ensuring that we have a test plan that's useful for what it set out to do.
Yeah, and I think David made a good point earlier, or implied a point that I translated as, we also don't want to see a situation where Wi-Fi routers typically operate, I'm sure in here, at somewhere around 250 milliwatts, maybe. Under the Part 15 rules can go up 4 times that. We don't want everybody to run in and turn their Wi-Fi up full volume either, just to drown out LTE-U. That's the arms race problem. Way in the back?
Yeah, hi, it's Judith Hellstein. My question is for Josh Breitbart. I very much liked your presentation and was wondering, I know the Link NYC was having problems with access and with people using it inappropriately, and I'm wondering if the Red Hook or the other places had more success in figuring out how do we get access to the people and not have it misused. How do we figure out how some of the goals of the wireless and having access to everyone and universal accessibility of it is now hampered because of some other issues that they were having on social issues, and how do the other groups have that issue, and then also more about on the privacy area of what is being tracked when you log in and you get accredited to use the Link NYC, and what's being done with that data, and where is that data going, and that.
Well, I don't want to get too far off the topic of the panel. I'll just point out that the issues that you may have read about with respect to Link NYC were focused on the tablet that's available in the kiosk, not to the Wi-Fi service. And I think the bottom line is that one of the challenges of being first and on the cutting edge with a lot of things is that there are many details to work out, including things like how you coexist with new technologies, because we are so far out ahead with our Wi-Fi deployments. I'd be happy to talk with you about these matters further, but just want to make sure we can focus on this issue.
Yeah, Doug?
Hi, Doug Brady. Yeah, I heard a lot of comparisons of the sort of LTE-U forum version and the LAA version, but I'm also curious, looking down the road, it sounds like the standalone version, I think pronounced multi-fi or something like that, seems to be getting some traction. I'm curious, it seems like there are also significant differences between LTE-U forum version and the multi-fi version. Are concerns about multi-fire greater or lesser than the LTE-U version, and what does that tell us about the sort of broad-based multi-stakeholder, building consensus around fair coexistence? Thanks.
I'll take a quick stab. I guess I've started. So multi-fire is very preliminary, Doug. So I'm not sure we're going to be able to compare it to the impact that LTE-U, as the LTE forum spec produced last year, what impact it had on Wi-Fi versus what multi-fire. But what is important is that we do have a space for innovation and new technology. If multi-fire, if LTE-U deliver tremendous efficiencies and greater throughput and do it in a way that do not harm the coexistence principles we've established, I think, over the last year, then that's good. We should all, 10 years from now, New York City may be using LTE-U or multi-fire, whatever it might be, if it's that much better. But clearly, I think over this last year, we've now established informally, if not formally, some important principles through statements of the chairman, through statements of some of the commissioners, that we've got to move forward and innovate while recognizing what we've already built. And I think Harold said it best. We can either do it on the front end with multi-fire and LTE-U, we'll do it now before they're deployed, or we're going to have to do it when hundreds of millions or tens of millions of consumers are impacted. And we talk now about a light government touch here. We've all sort of favored the light touch used here. Tell you have 10 million devices or 10 million consumers impacted and hundreds of millions of devices. We're not going to see a light government touch. So, the folks saying that this was an intrusion, a heavy-handed intrusion by the government hasn't seen anything yet if we start interfering. So I think that principle will apply as multi-fire goes forward. I think everyone in there fully understands the process developed this last year, and those lessons will be learned as we go forward on multi-fire.
I'd also like to share some perspective on multi-fires. So, once again, if they learn from the lessons that we're going through right now, that would be extremely valuable. But when you think of LTE-U and LAA, you're thinking downlink traffic only right now. You have an evolution on LAA where it'll be standardized in Release 14 where it's uplink. With multi-fire, you're going to have uplink and downlink traffic, which means greater opportunities for harmful interference. So as long as multi-fire looks at the existing environment, which would then include Wi-Fi, unlicensed LTE, understands what each of these technologies are trying to do, and they can detect it at a lower level so it doesn't impair coexistence, then everything will be great. Then we'd have technologies that can coexist. But if they don't, and you end up having interference at some of these lower level signals, which could impact some of the use cases that Josh pointed out, then the consumer that made that investment, their product might not work as well. The Xbox that's streaming via Wi-Fi, or the dongle connected to the TV. So this is just a continuation of the current discussion. Hopefully some lessons have been learned with respect to the importance of coexistence and understanding what those technologies are trying to accomplish. And if multi-fire incorporates that, that'd be fantastic.
Okay. Well, we've hit 2 o'clock, so I'm fairly sure that the speakers will be happy to take any remaining individual questions here or by email. So please join me in thanking the panel as well as Josh and Kevin. And thank you all for coming, and hopefully you're on our list, and if not, go to our homepage. You can sign up for any events at New America by topic. Thanks.